Mr. Chris Bruno, welcome to the Wolf and Iron podcast. Great to have you here, man.
Thanks so much. It is awesome. Thanks for the invitation.
I don't know how I got connected with you, but I'm glad I did. Somehow I got an email from you or from someone talking about your book, Sage, and I was like, "This is perfect." I'm 44 years old. I'm kind of getting into that second season of life, or maybe I'm already there and I'm just in denial. But I'm in, I'm into that second passage of life where I'm recognizing that, okay, maybe the first half of my life is done. Second half is now happening. And so I was like, this is a fantastic book at a great time for me. And I know a lot of my listeners, a lot of people who watch, those guys are also in that same position. And so we're going to dive into this. But before I do, I just want to ask you a little bit about yourself, what you do, and then we'll get into the book.
Absolutely. Well, again, thanks for the invitation. So I do two things. I do a million things underneath two umbrellas. I'll put it that way. One of them is called Restoration Project. This is a nationwide ministry to men, and we're actually helping men, similar to what you're doing, kind of recover their hearts and find restoration in their lives, in their marriages, in their families. So that is one of the things that I started and lead. And then the second is called Restory Counseling, and that is a counseling center that's located here in Colorado. But we have staff, we have counselors all across the country to do the deeper work and getting into the lives and hearts of who God made us to be and how we have forgotten and how we can restore our lives and come back to His original design for us. So that's some of what I do. Been married 27 years. I've got 3 kids. Who are mostly adults, 22, 19, and 16. So that's where I find myself right now.
Those are still busy.
Similar to you,
Yeah.
I'm in my 40s. I'm 49, so I'm a little bit ahead of you just by 5, but right in that mark.
Yeah, no, that's great. And as far as kids go, those are busy years, or they can be. That teenage transition. I mean, we talk about these stages of life, but that transition from teenage to young adult, and then into adult years, and then so I'm just there as well with my 20 and 22-year-old. So it sounds like we got some things in common. And I wanted to ask about the restory piece because I love that term, and you mentioned it just a little bit. Tell us a little bit about what that means to restory something.
So a lot of the work that you'll find in the realms of counseling is kind of in two different spaces that I find unhelpful, Mike. So first is that either we're just treating symptoms. So you might have depression or anxiety or some relational problem, and so those are the symptoms that are kind of bubbling to the surface. Mm-hmm. Or you're dealing with some kind of sin management, something that you're kind of don't want to have in your life. Maybe it's an addiction. Maybe it's some unwanted sexual behavior. Maybe there's some anger outbursts, those kinds of things, some things that are unwanted in your life, and you're trying to manage those and contain those. I find that the deeper and better work is actually looking at what is on the surface. Yes, those symptoms are on the surface, but to restore it is to go into the actual narrative that you have lived and learned over the course of your life. Much of it coming from your, earliest years, your childhood years and your really young adult years. And how did you come to understand yourself, the world, and God as a result of the shaping elements in your life, your family of origin, maybe traumas, tragedies, wounds that you've experienced, those kinds of things. And to restory is not just to look at the outcomes of those unwanted behaviors or symptoms, but to look at what actually happened in the narrative. And can we enter into the narrative itself with a guide, with a counselor, and begin to unpack what happened and where have you deviated or left, either knowingly or most often unknowingly, from the design and the course that God actually had for you in the beginning. Because at one point you were a thought in the mind of God that He determined would be good for you to exist. And that thought has not changed. It still is good for you to exist. And so can we come back to His original design for who you were made to be? And that's the work of Restory.
And I think that type of work is so key for men to really be able to enter in with confidence into that second passage of their life. As you say, just because there's so much, you either have the opportunity to bring, a bunch of baggage with you and continue making the same mistakes that you've made all up to this point, or figure some things out and get some clarity on your life and get some clarity on the kind of man God's really calling you to be. And so I think that that's those things really, for some guys, those things don't come to a head until they get to a place where there's a bit of a breather and they look back on their life, like with their kids being in their 20s or something like that. And they go, man, like, okay, obviously there's some patterns here in my life or in my family dynamics that have led me to this point, and I need to do some things to change course and whatnot. Yeah. So I think that's really key.
Yeah, absolutely. And right in midlife, I think in that middle passage, as we're talking about, is where the scripts or the rhythms or the behaviors of the past, we kind of come to a place, Mike, where they stop working. Mm-hmm. Or I like to say that the story starts leaking even more, and it leaks out into our families, into our lives, and all that. And in many cases, it leads to, and maybe we'll get into this further in our conversation, into that midlife crisis. And that part is where I think, yes, it is a great opportunity for us to evaluate where have we come from and where are we going?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And for the guys who are listening to this or watching this, maybe you're in your 40s or you're hitting that sort of midlife area, and you get a chance to really think about the kind of grandfather you want to be, not just a sage as in an influence on multiple people, but just really your own family. And I think we've all known people, if we didn't experience this in our own family, we've known people who, like, as a dad, maybe it was just a really harsh guy and just really, angry all the time. And then he becomes a grandpa and he's like the soft puppy, and he's loved by his grandchildren. And his children kind of feel gypped, like, you weren't that easy on us. Yeah. But you get a chance to decide that, like, what kind of man are you going to be? And hopefully you are, you guys are being intentional and learning some things as you go along. And so let's dive into why you wanted to write this book, because I love the fact that it's focused on the particular topic that a lot of guys, when they reach our age, have a lot of questions about, like, okay, what do I do now? How do I still make an impact or be significant, especially if they felt like maybe they haven't been significant up to this point? Give us an idea, like, what was the kind of the mindset for you when you were putting this together?
Yeah. So I always try to write out of my own life experience. And so the Sage is my third book. My first book was all about a rite of passage process that I was leading my son through as I was attempting to kind of usher him from boyhood into manhood. And that's called Man Maker Project. And it is all about that first passage of life and kind of what I was facing as a father and what my son's journey was bringing up in my own life and story about either what I had or most likely what I didn't have from my dad. In that rites of passage journey, that 13-year-old, 15-year-old, 18-year-old's time of his life.
Yeah.
So when I got to my own passage as a middle-aged man, realized, like, there is actually a second passage. That being the first passage when a boy becomes a man. The second passage is when a man becomes a sage. And so I wanted to explore that and dive into that again for myself, kind of living out loud what is happening in my life. And maybe there's some things in this conversation that could be helpful to other guys. So that's where it came from.
Yeah. Well, and this may be jumping ahead a little bit, but, as I think about us as fathers, we have the opportunity to bring other guys along and do some kind of rite of passage or something like that for our sons. What happens, like, as a man? Like, is it in your mind, is it older men? Is it the guys that are in their 70s and 80s? Or is it, like, who's qualifying us and saying, okay, you've made it, or you've now entered into the second phase, let's go. How does that happen?
Yeah, I believe actually that it's not older men. It actually begins much, much younger. And in the work that I do with men, I've actually seen it happening well into, in the early 30s, where men are going, hey, what is this man life that I'm living? Is this script that I've been given about what it means to be a good man, a good father, a Christian man, whatever it is that the kind of script that I want to live with and according to for the rest of my life? So guys in their 30s, I feel like, are starting to go, hey, this may or may not be the script I want to live. And therefore, what is the script that I want to live? How do I come back to the man that God made me to be? So I feel like what qualifies a man to walk the passage of the second passage is is some level of maturity and age. You're not going to do this when you're 20, but you're also, it's also, let's not wait. If you're feeling the rumblings inside of your soul, if you're feeling some of those tremors that are starting to shake the foundations of your identity and your relationships and your calling and all that, that's the time to engage. So it is not wait till you're 70.
Yeah, no, that's good. And that's good as well to tell guys that are in their 30s that are probably feeling that, but I've been able to identify that as like, this is the thing that I'm feeling. Oh, I'm feeling called to something greater than my immature boyhood sort of longings. Yeah. And it's going to carry me at least forward a little bit into that second passage of life. I know I felt that myself when I was in my 30s. I was a software developer. I had a good job, well-paying job. And I remember being out a lot of times me and the other guys, other developer dudes, we'd be sipping on our lattes and we'd be standing at the window watching the guys outside, like cutting grass or using a backhoe. And we were like, oh man, if I could just get 30 minutes on that thing, or if I could just get outside and do something else. And that longing was so strong to just not do this, not do this virtual, create code and create things. It's, great for supporting my family, but it just didn't fulfill me. And so I made some changes to get out of that. But, a lot of guys, I think are in their 30s, like you said, when those rumblings start to happen and they start looking for, if they're smart, they're going to look for an avenue to progress towards a better man. But give us some ideas of what guys who are maybe not smart or they're immature in their thinking still, and they hit that 30-year-old or they hit that 40-year mark. What do they do to kind of pursue, I guess, the wrong path towards, it's not going to lead them towards being a sage. It's going to keep them kind of stuck where they are.
Yeah. What a great question. So for those that are not smart or whatever, however you put
yeah. I don't know. I mean, hey, look, you might be dumb out there. Okay.
I feel like I was in that, so maybe I'm not smart, but in the book, I talk about these two concepts that are called projections and personas.
Okay.
And I want to unpack that briefly here because I think it's important to your question. So a projection happens early in life where I am projecting out onto the world. I'm looking for who I am based on, what the world is telling me. So I'm projecting onto my career. I'm projecting onto my relationships. I'm projecting onto my bank account, the kind of car that I drive, how beautiful my wife is, any of those things I'm projecting out. And so that's where I find my identity. So it's kind of like, what mask do I put onto the world? A persona is the mask that I put on myself. So in my family growing up, it's just me and my older sister, and she has some pretty severe developmental disabilities to where she's still alive today, but she operates at about a 1-year-old level. So the persona, and I can unpack that more if you want, but the persona that I needed to take based on my family of origin was that I was the good boy who would be kind of the emotional container. I was going to make sure that everybody else was okay. And so that's the role, that's the person that I put onto myself in order to manage the world. And I got a lot of traction out of that. I got a lot of good vibes back to me and accolades and all that for taking on that role. So, but there is a part of me that is that, goodness. I want to bring goodness to the world, but it wasn't fully who I was because it was just based on the mask I was putting on. So to answer your question, I feel like those that kind of fumble or stumble through midlife are those that are not aware of their projections or their personas. And then when one of them begins to fail, they just look for another one. So proverbially, like the midlife crisis is, the wife that I have is not fulfilling my needs. And so I'm going to divorce her and find another wife. That's going to solve my problems. Or I'm going to quit my job and find another job, or sell my car and buy another car. That's all projections and personas that fail. And what we know is that just another job, car, wife, whatever is not going to fix you.
Yeah.
Not going to bring you a sense of your identity. It's not going to help you understand who God made you to be. And so that's where I feel like I see most of the guys go off the rails in whatever forms, addictions, affairs, like that kind of stuff in this midlife time period, because their projections are failing them, their personas are failing them. And wisdom, then I think, would be to pursue, what does it look like for me? Where is my identity? How am I projecting that? And how do I bring those things back to myself rather than depend on the world or these other people things to tell me who I am? I need to bring all of that back into myself.
Yeah, no, that's excellent and very well explained. So let me ask this then, because some guys would hear that and go, okay, my desire for another wife, that's not good. But desire for like things like a car or to move, to go live somewhere different or whatever the case is, they would go, well, those are just all midlife crisis things and I should just ignore those. But I don't think that's necessarily what you're saying, or that's really the case, because I know there's a part of the work that you do, which is recovering some of those things that we've given up over time because we've been living out this false identity, or we've been just too busy with the kids, or we've been too busy with whatever else life demanded of us. And now we finally are getting to a place, where where we're thinking about, okay, maybe not retirement, but we're thinking about the next half of our life and who are we going to live that for? So tell us a little bit about how we recognize the difference between like a healthy desire to recover something that maybe was part of our youth, and if we can bring that back, it's going to help us out, versus something that we're bringing in that's really just going to distract us and keep us in this kind of unfulfilled spot in life.
Another great question. And so the way that I describe this, Mike, is the logo of our counseling center is a cross section of a tree. And so you can see the outside of the tree, the adult tree on the outside, and all of the rings of the tree on the inside. I think that is actually our metaphor for our lives, that all of the stories, all of the ages that we have ever been still live inside of us. And though we see just the adult on the outside that's been moved or shaped or morphed or whatever by how those seasons of our lives were shaped, it shapes the next one and the next one and the next one. That is just really an important thing for us to begin to look back and review on. So to answer your question, is that move or is that next career more true to those parts of you that are the oldest parts of you? Those that original boy that was grown up, what part of you did you export to the world to tell you who you were, or like I said, put on a mask to kind of fulfill a role that you felt was required of you? If you were to take off all those masks and take off all those projections, then who are we left with? If a move or a change is actually coming out of a place of, this is who I was made to be, this is the identity that I've discovered from within me, that I think is great. Go there, do that, find that, pursue that. But if it's coming out of I'm just looking for the next thing because whatever I have right now is not exciting enough, or I'm not feeling like it's meeting all my needs or fulfilling me enough, that's where we get into that danger zone.
Yeah. Yep. And one of the things I love about this idea of being a sage is that it's really geared towards people. It doesn't really do anything to be a sage all unto yourself, right? So, I mean, if that's really what we're pursuing, if that's the goal in life, is to become someone that people look up to, or that we can give back to other people, then that means people, our families primarily, wives and kids, are going to be the main objects for us in a lot of ways. And so I think that's kind of another test there, is to say, does this draw me closer to the people that I really love? Or is this something for me to just encapsulate myself kind of, away from everybody else's, a guard, guys will take on hobbies sometimes. They get the old car they're going to be in the shop all the time. And sure, when they get old and they die, the kids remember how much dad loved that old car, but that's not the same thing as, dad used that as a vehicle, in a sense, to spend time with us, or to better the relationships. I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Mike, it was fascinating. Even just last night, I was on a walk with my wife around the neighborhood, and it was after dark by the time that we could, kind of get out and start walking, and probably around, just in our, I don't know, half an hour walk around the neighborhood, we passed, I think I counted 6 open garages with men in there alone with some project that he was working on. And I could tell by the other lights in the house that there were other people home
Yeah.
doing things, but he was tinkering with a car, or he was watching a football game, drinking a beer, he was doing whatever. And I commented to my wife, like, how many garage men are there
Hmm.
that are turning away from the actual like depth and meat and life of that we are given, because the garage is an escape. And I would have had a totally different feeling about that, or thought about that, if he's in the garage and he's doing things and he's surrounded by the people that he loves. There's not, I love my garage. I
Yeah.
have projects in my garage too,
Sure.
but it's not that. It's what are we doing with it, and what are we trying to escape
Hmm.
when we go out to the garage. So that's just one example of that for sure. I feel like the tagline of the book here is the task of the first passage of a man's life is to find the man within the boy and call him forth.
Hmm.
Come forth, man, that is in this boy, and become a man. The task of the second passage is to find the boy within the man and bring him home.
That's great.
Bring home those parts of him that he has forgotten or lost, and reintegrate those parts that have been exiled or forgotten or broken off or whatever. Bring back into himself those projections and personas.
Yeah.
That, I think, is when he does that, he will do the things we're talking about.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And I'll share some things with you. I don't really know where this is going, but as kind of just appropriate
Yeah.
to talk about. So, a couple of things going on in my life. So earlier this year, I went out to Utah and picked up a 1991 Volkswagen Vanagon.
I heard on the podcast.
Yeah, yeah, and it's awesome. I love it. It was pretty rattly when I got it home because I drove it through it actually got towed home, but even once I got it going again, it was pretty rattly and stuff like that. But it was a lot of fun for me. And I was thinking about it actually on the drive home. I was thinking about this. So my wife and I met when we were 16 in high school, and I was driving a 1979 Volkswagen Dasher, which was white. Is a piece of junk car, but it's one of those things you still have fondness for because it was your first car. It's a white car with black trim, and here I am in this, this 1991, but still Vanagon, that's white with black trim. And, I'm feeling the steering wheel feels the same as my old Volkswagen. There's buttons you can push, and it doesn't tell you how to do everything. So it's great. It's an analog, kind of vehicle.
Yeah.
And I was just reminded of like, man, like this is in a way connecting me with my childhood and something that I really, loved, which was that first car and that freedom and that feeling. And now I get a chance to kind of continue that with my wife when we go on trips and do things like that. So that happened, which was cool. And so recommend that. The other thing is I've started a third book, and it's a fiction book, and it takes place in my childhood home, Hatchie, Tennessee, and near the Hatchie River. And so I grew up right on the banks of the river. Anyhow, so these kids in the book are kind of living my early life with a lot more cool happenings as fiction books go. But just digging into that story and writing this story has been bringing a lot of stuff forward about the stuff that I used to love as a child. And so I think and that's almost like a visualization exercise every time I have to think about a new scene or something like that. But I do really believe that, taking time away to just visualize childhood, things you loved, the stuff that you spent time doing that really brought you joy, made you feel close to God, close to your friends. I think those are good things to do as a man as you get older, and to say, what are the parts of me that are the oldest parts of me that I can remember that really just connect me to, I think, what God has made me to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like first of all, I love that. I can't wait to read the book. So can't wait for you to finish that. The what you're talking about is to both remember those parts of you that were good and pleasant and good memories, and you felt connected to yourself and to God.
Mm-hmm.
And also those parts of you that may remain kind of broken off, or long and lost and forgotten, or buried, parts of you that are hated, parts of you that you feel disgusted by, parts of you that feel kind of you've had to exile them out of your life because they they just were not acceptable. Those are also extremely important parts because those and memories and to explore that, which is part of why it kind of part and parcel with Restory is most of the time those parts of us that we have exiled or forgotten or buried are super, super important to who I am actually to become. And we don't like them, and we don't like them for a reason. But actually, underneath there is a story of a young boy who was probably in those moments really lost, really innocent. And
Hmm.
what I mean by innocent is both like not guilty, but also naive. And he just didn't know. He just didn't know. Have worked with a lot of guys and all kinds of things. And I mean, I'm sure in the work you do, pornography comes up a lot. And
Yep.
most of the time that guys have an exposure to pornography, it happened when they were boys, and they feel this like guilt or shame around that exposure, and then what it became in their lives and all that the years and years afterwards. But if we go back to that original boy who found it, however it came into his life, and then started to use it, the questions that I would ask is not like, what was wrong with you? The questions I would ask is what was happening in your life that you needed to go to pornography in order to find escape?
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. And those are the parts of you that we want to tend to. So, yeah, does that make sense?
No, that totally makes sense. And I think that's obviously that's a fantastic one because a lot of guys are dealing with that. And now obviously we're raising kids that are probably dealing with that kind of stuff, I was just, as you were talking, one of the things that just came to mind immediately was, so you and I, we've both been married to our wives for a while. And so my wife has a collection of poems and things that I wrote her when I was a teenager. And every once in a while, she'll get these things out, and it is literally the most embarrassing thing in the world for her to read these to me. Read them back, like, let me read this poem that you wrote when you were so in love with me. And I've wondered for years, like, why does this embarrass me so much? But I think it's because it connects to that type of innocence that I had as a kid, that just unabashed love. Like, she's my singular focus right now. She's the most important thing to me right now. And that seems so childlike and immature to me as an adult to think like that. And it's weird to think of that I at one point thought that way. Not that I don't love my wife, but to
Yeah.
just be a total romantic and all that kind of stuff. And so I think that those, whether it's something that damaged you or something that is actually good and beneficial, but you still feel that sort of like weirdness about it or shame about it, I think it's worth diving into. And it's actually just giving me something now to think about, like, man, I really need to go back and read some of those old poems, maybe write some new poems, and just connect with that part of myself that just feels so young and naive,
Yes.
and bring it forward. Like you said, bring it home.
Yes, absolutely. What an incredible exercise that could be for you to actually connect with that poet inside of you and bless him for what he was all those years ago when he was first, in those teenage years of falling in love. And like, what is it like to bring him home
Yep.
for you for him to be welcome at your kind of internal table and sit with him and talk with him and ask him questions of like, hey, what were you trying to express, and what can you still express even today with now the more mature love that we have together in our marriage?
Yeah.
What a
That's,
great exercise.
that's really good. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate you bringing that up. Okay. So here's a question I got. Is the sage role, is that for every man? Because there's a lot of guys that have gotten to this point in life and they're going, dude, I ain't ever going to be no sage. Like, that's just never going to happen. I'm not that guy. I don't even know what I'm about half the time. Is it something for every guy, or is this a book that you've written for the guys who recognize it within themselves that they long to be that?
Yeah. I'm going to say that it's for every guy. And here's why: that I believe that becoming this elder, becoming this older, this man who has done this work to pursue his own identity and pursue his own heart and bring these parts of him back home to himself, that is actually the pinnacle of manhood. I feel like there is something about when we have a society of sages the world looks vastly, vastly different. It is safer, it is more secure, it is more connected, it is more attached, it is more at peace. All of those things are the ramifications of having a world of sages.
Hmm.
So no man, I think, is exempt from the call to become a sage. And it doesn't mean that you have advice to offer. It doesn't mean that you have all this like experience that you're going to download to the next generation. That we now have YouTube that does a great job of like downloading information and all that. That's not what a sage is. A sage is a man with presence. A sage is a man with a settledness inside of him. A sage is a man that has a generous kind of hospitality to those in his community and his circles and around him, to his family specifically, but also to everyone else. So that is what a sage is. And I think it's it's the kind of this growth into maturity. And I'm going to say into maturity because I don't think we actually ever arrive as I am now, christened as a mature man and I've arrived at this place. I don't think that ever happens. But I think there is a call to more maturity over time. And so, yes, I think it is a call for every man, but I don't think that every man hears that call. I don't think that every man feels that or attends to those places. And one of the things I talk about in the book is all men grow old, but not every man becomes an elder. Mm. Those that don't become sages just become elderly. Yeah. And that's just the look on your face right now. That's just the kind of
nobody wants to be that guy. Like, I mean, come on.
Yeah. And it has, and I want to be clear too, it has nothing to do with retirement. Yeah. So if you are retired or looking to retire, great. Whatever you believe about that and want to do in that realm, that's totally fine. It doesn't have to do with ceasing work. It means who you are and becoming who you're becoming in your own self and what you bring to the world. I feel like that's really the pinnacle of manhood. And yet we often think that, the pinnacle of our lives is in what would be the stage before sage is kind of the king of like, I now have a domain that I am ruling. I have a household. I have a quiver full of children. I have, this whole, I'm leading a business or I'm successful in my career or my bank account is at X dollars. Now I have arrived at, the pinnacle of manhood. And I think though those things are good, and though being a good king is a season of a man's life, that there is still yet another season. Behind every good king is a good sage.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And once again, for the guys who are listening to this or watching this, think about how different your life would be, or just society, if we had more sages out there. We see the brokenness, we see the craziness going on, and there need to be, where are the old men, the tough guys that are in their 60s and 70s, they will just come out and say, look, this is how it's supposed to be. And they've got a life of success in a sense, but they have a life of meaningful work and, a good family, things to point to say, here, look at what we've done. And just how different things would be if we had that today.
And be at rest. Like that, I think is one of the most important parts of what it means to be a sage, is that when I am in the presence of that kind of man, I am at rest. I don't have anything to prove. He has nothing to prove. He's just there for me to create space for me to exist. And maybe as I'm younger than him or whatever, it's I'm wrestling through things, I'm talking through things, I'm asking questions, I'm asking for maybe sometimes advice, but most of the time I just kind of like vomit my life onto someone else and just have them be present. And that, just like you said, what would it look like? What would our world look like if we had a world, a society, a generation of sages? Be vastly, vastly different.
I had this image of my granddaddy. He's still around, but my grandparents sort of raised me. My dad was an alcoholic. My parents divorced when I was a little kid, and my mom was kind of a wild child for a number of years. So my grandparents really raised me on my mom's side. And I remember my granddaddy, he was always into like he was into a lot of things, but he had something that he was doing that I wanted to be about. Like, he was going hunting, he was shooting something, he was sharpening something, he was building something, he was doing something, not as an avoidant, tactic, But just that was just part of living out in the country, is things that you had to do. And I was just wondering, like, how important are those that kind of activity, for our kids or grandkids growing up, to see us as a sage, so to speak, but really to have something where we bring them into it, and along, into our world. I don't know. Any thoughts on that kind of stuff?
What did you receive from your granddaddy?
Just a patient kind of time,
Okay.
and lessons, and we could talk about the things that I actually learned, but I think one of the things that I learned most was just how to approach things, and just how to be about things. Oh, slow down. Slow down, take your time, do it right. Those kinds of things. Whereas from a dad, most of the time, dads are busy. Hurry up, get it done. We got to go. There's always there's a thing to go to. There's a thing to do. Dads are just going crazy. Granddads are not like that. And so I think there's a sense, like you said, of that restfulness.
Yeah.
That came along with it.
The reason I asked that question is because, yes, you may have learned how to sharpen a knife or do some woodworking or fix a car. So those are the practical lessons. But really what we're getting from those sages is not the information. We're getting this kind of passing of this masculine substance that comes from them to us. You can't see it and you can't be trained in it. You just absorb it. And I love what you said. You learned how to be. And I think you learned how to be as a man, but I think you also learned how to exist in the world as a human. And his presence is what brought that to you, rather than his lessons about whatever it was that he was doing. So that is exactly what a sage is.
That's great. So let's think about here for the guys who are thinking, okay, this is speaking to me. This has hit my heart. This is where I want to be, on a path towards. Where does a guy begin? Like, what are the things that he needs to do practically? Is it listening to podcasts? Is it exercise? Is that kind of stuff? Or is it something else that, that maybe we just don't get taught anymore?
Yeah. One of my friends I read about in the book, his name is Craig. We talk about this midlife crisis, and I love how he talks about it. He says it's a midlife awakening. And so I think there is something in our midlife that, will we enter it with crisis, or will we enter it with a sense of opportunity to awaken to ourselves? So how a guy starts is, I think, just sitting down with a journal and maybe a good friend, maybe a counselor, maybe with your wife, and go like, I intend to become this kind of man. And so, the things that we intend to do are the things that end up happening.
Yeah.
Right. Where we put action and intention together, those are the things that end up happening. And so the roadmap, I think, is just starting there. Is this the man that you want to become? And then doing some level of like assessment. Where are those projections? Where are those personas? Who have I had to be? Maybe some kind of looking back in the history logs and stories of your life, kind of recognizing like, how have I landed where I am today? What scripts have I been following? Who told me that this is what it means to be a man? And I'm not saying like everything should come into question. Some of the things that we're probably experiencing are really good.
Yeah.
And some of them may not be. And so to sit with that for a moment and just do a little assessment, kind of life assessment. And then really kind of learn, what does it look like for you to grow into? In the book, I talk about several different markers of what a sage is and what that looks like in his life. And then kind of a backwards assessment. So how am I in that? How am I in this area? How am I in that area? And then the final thing would be like, what parts of myself, as we were talking about earlier, have I remain unattended in my life, that I don't tend to, that I've exiled or hate, or I'm ashamed of the poet inside of me. And so let me ask the question, like, what is that, and what goodness can be found there? And why do I always approach that with shame? So those are some good beginning kind of questions.
I like that. And as you're talking, I was thinking about, I've been sort of looking at this through this sort of rose-colored glasses, or maybe a particular funnel, which is the sage is in my brain was this guy he's had a family, that family's grown up, and then he's become a grandfather or something like that, and whatever he's gone through later in life. But what about the guy who he's just wrecked it, or life just hasn't gone his way, and he's in his 40s and he's going, nothing that I've wanted has happened, and I found myself divorced, or maybe without kids, or out of a career, and now I just feel like I don't know how am I going to become a sage when I just feel like I don't even have it together. Is it still those same kind of steps, or is it something different?
Yeah, I would say it's still the same kind of steps. And so for that man who may be listening, first of all, I just want to say, like, it's not over. It's not over. God is not done with you yet. There is still hope for who you were designed to be. And though you have suffered much and walked through much, and maybe some of that is your fault, and maybe some of that has been done to you, the story, a friend of mine often says, there's still ink in the pen.
That's good.
And I love that if you are that man, and you're listening to this, could there still be possibility for God's not done with you yet? And a sage is not a successful man. So success is not a marker of a sage. He may have a blown up family. He may have bankruptcy and divorce and addiction and whatever else in his life, in his history. A sage is a man who does the hard work to address those places in his life and tend to those places and heal those areas of his life. That is the marker of a sage. It is not someone who's kind of walked through life unscathed and everything has been wonderful and beautiful. I'm actually more afraid of that man who's had all this success in the world and all those kinds of things than someone who has suffered much. Actually, a significant marker of a sage is that he knows the crucible of suffering and has become acquainted with grief. Because if he is acquainted with his own grief, then I can bring my grief to him and he will be unshaken. Yep. That, I think, is a powerful sage. So look at all the sages throughout the fiction stories that we have, the biblical stories that we have, your own personal narrative of your grandparents or people in your past. For me, it was a youth leader that was my first experience of a sage. And ask yourself the question: were they perfect, or did they engage the parts of their lives that brought them to the place of that level of maturity? And I think it's 100%. All sages have walked through something around this healing process.
That's great. That's really great. And as you think about it practically, I mean, it's the guys that have been through the stuff that are the most real. They're willing to be the most real, be the most transparent. It's also the guys that you're not going to rock their world, like you said. If you bring something up to them, oh man, I've been watching porn for 5 years and I can't believe, what it's done in my marriage, or whatever the case is. They've seen it all, heard it all, probably. They've been through quite a bit of it, and yet they're still fighting, and they've got some lessons to share. So I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
When we talk about reviving the heart of a man, I know that's critical, and we've kind of touched on this a little bit. How does a man begin to, I guess, sort of unpack those areas of his heart that have been sort of calloused over for so long? And I'm kind of thinking of myself here, calloused over, or he's had to put aside, set aside. Maybe he loved music when he was young, or maybe he loved poetry, or he loved whatever. What's the path forward into that? Because in my mind, I'm thinking that takes time. It takes quite a bit of energy. It takes changing something in your life to reclaim something that you used to have, and softening, tenderizing that heart, that's become probably calloused and cold towards the world and things like that. Do you have any advice for how a guy just moves forward into that?
A couple things come to mind, Mike, as in response to your question. The first is that I view hope as a form of defiance. And that to hope for something is actually to defy that which seeks to destroy us, seeks which to take away our identity, seeks to minimize us, diminish us, emasculate us, whatever it is, and to hope for something is to defy the narratives that are attempting to overwrite the narrative that God has written into your life. And so to have a sense of hope is actually to defy that darker story, that forgotten story, that and defy the story that caused the calluses in the first place. Okay.
Yep.
So I want to start there. But then secondly, a little bit of a shift in thinking is rather than, looking at the calluses of your heart or looking at the places that are broken or forgotten, or you've like just, exiled, as I said, as bad. The question that I would ask is why, where, and how did those calluses form? And how have those calluses served me as I've tried to survive the tragedies that I have faced in my life? Because those calluses are actually survival techniques that may be maladaptive, may not be helpful anymore, but at some point they were helpful. And so rather than hate them, can we begin to thank them for what they have done and then dismiss them from our lives rather than try to like rip them open and take them off and cut them off and like that kind of stuff? It's more a gentle and tender approach to them rather than a violent one. So the calluses are there for a reason. And we need to be gentle and thoughtful in how we approach those stories in our lives because they are there for a reason.
Yeah.
And what is underneath a callus is very tender. And so when we do get to those levels, can I approach it with, in Psalm 62, it talks about how God is a God of strength and God is a God of tenderness. And so there is both a strength and tenderness within him. Can we bring our strength to say, hey, no more, and our tenderness to say, and I will not destroy you. I will not hate you any longer. So that is one thing. First thing. The second thing is that most of the time we need a guide. We need someone who will be a sage in our lives, will be someone who can walk with us through the exploration of these things. This is most likely something that you're not going to be doing without a sage, without a pastor, without a counselor, without a therapist, without a life coach, whatever it is that you look for, someone who can be a guide for you there, because we cannot see our own faces. We need a mirror to mirror back to us who we are and what we see, and someone who's brave enough to name some of the things in our lives that we, just haven't been able to name for ourselves. We cannot heal things that we don't name.
Yeah.
And so we need to be able to do that. And most of the time we can't do that for ourselves.
I think that's really good. And I've really benefited from counselors throughout my life, especially the older men that have counseled me. There was a guy that I was seeing for a while. I guess he was in his 70s. I remember I was just turning 40. And I remember just thinking like, okay, I don't have anything particular to talk about, but I've got a lot of questions. Like I've been thinking about, the end of my life a lot, or the fact that I will have an end of my life. Like there's that, at some point you get to a place where you go, man, I'm going to die one day. I'm probably not going to beat this thing, And it's like, is that normal? Does this ever go away? Or questions about like, I don't know how to cry at movies, or I stop myself from getting too emotional about things. Can I fix that? Right. These aren't questions that most guys have answers to. And so you really need someone who can say from an older man's perspective and with some wisdom and some hindsight to say, like, here's kind of what I felt. Here's what most guys go through. Here's how, kind of work through these processes, or let's talk more about that, or where do you think that comes from? Whatever. But I think those counselors are just so incredible and so key. And a lot of guys, once again, don't take the time to do that. But like you said, it's crucial.
The best way for us to learn how to engage our own stories in our own lives is with someone who has done that work already for themselves. Mm-hmm. You're not going to fix the not crying thing, but you're going to learn how to cry with a man who cries.
Yeah.
You're going to engage the end of your life, and what that looks like to die with someone who has also faced the reality of his mortality. And so that I think is important for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, I just kind of want to wrap this up here because I think that there's a lot of things we could talk about around this. Obviously, you guys need to go get the book, check it out. And we'll have links in the show notes and things like that for the book. I just want every guy who's listening to this to just imagine, maybe if you've been fortunate enough to have a sage in your life, but most guys haven't. This is a bit of an exercise, but just take some time to think about what would that look like to have an older gentleman who you trusted totally, that you felt at peace about when you're around him, that you could talk to him about whatever, life situations are, and how much joy and peace and that would bring to you, wisdom that, would bring into your life. And think about now you have the opportunity to be that. You may not have that in your life. That may be very difficult to find these days, depending on where you are, depending on, that kind of stuff. You have the opportunity to be that for somebody else. Don't squander that opportunity.
Yes. And I just think back to our point earlier, like what would it look like for there to be our generation, this 35 to 65, 70, 85, our generation of men? How can we actually change the trajectory of our society, of our families, of our divorce rates, of our, addiction rates, all of that, because there are these pylons of society, these sages that kind of ground us. That is an opportunity that I think is really exciting. And that is why I want to do this work, because I want to be part of that generation of guys.
Yep. 100%. And I also felt like there was somewhere in this podcast, permission for you to go buy whatever car you want to buy that makes you feel like a young kid again. So go ahead and do that. Send Chris any kind of complaints from your wife. He's cool with that.
I went and bought myself a Jeep just last year. I had, similar to you, I had a Jeep when I was a teenager and sold it off school loans and all that kind of stuff. And just last year went and bought myself a Jeep. And I love it. And I feel like a little boy again inside of it. And that is not what we're talking about here. It's not to diminish that. And I'm not looking to my Jeep for my identity.
Yep. For sure. Yeah. But there is something though. I actually, with my Vanagon, my wife will sometimes say, "Hey, can I drive it?" And we switch cars. And I'm like, "No, I don't want to. I want to drive it. It's my baby." Yeah. No, it's cool though. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun being middle-aged. I will say that because you do reach a season of life where you feel more like confident as a man, and you really feel that you have the ability to make changes in your life instead of just having so much of life dictated to you, or you're just kind of running with whatever the flow is of kids and that kind of stuff. It's a really blessed season of life. And I think every guy should take advantage of it. And your book certainly is going to help them do that. So, yeah, Chris, thank you so much, man, for being on here.
Hey, so great to be with you today.
Well, there you have it, men. I'd love to know what you thought about the episode. Feel free to reach out to me on any of my social media networks. And look, if you got something out of this, make sure another guy does too. Share the episode and make sure it gets in front of the guys that need to hear it the most. Until next time, keep your powder dry, and may a fair wind be always in your sails.